and welcome back to Vox Popcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable of pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, and I am once again here with my co-hosts, Jean Valjean and Cassette.
What a weird casting.
I didn't say which one of you is which.
Either way, what a strange casting.
Hannah and Wayne, welcome back, guys. How's it going?
Hey, Mav, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm tired. All of my technology is failing me. I hope the show doesn't, like, there's a non-zero chance that my computer bursts into flames while we're doing the show today.
Okay.
I would like that to not happen.
It's because you liked Christmas on the Square.
I loved Christmas on the Square.
I know.
I mean, I didn't, like, I think on last episode, I wasn't sure if I liked it or not. I just said it was the most important piece of literature ever created. But now, given a week to digest it, I believe I love it. I worry about what that says about me. But
it's the most messed up thing I've ever seen in my entire life, probably.
I mean, just keep sitting on it. Just watch it a dozen more times and just let it roll over you. Wayne, you haven't seen it yet. It's something.
It's going to also somehow be relevant for
everything I talk about for the rest of my life.
I mean, in some ways that could be true.
Oh, good.
But definitely relevant for today, because it is a Dolly Parton produced musical that is roughly a Christmas Carol, kinda. Also, maybe It's a Wonderful Life. Also, maybe she's God and she impregnates a woman during it. And it's, their song.
Is there anything Dolly can't do?
No.
Convince me that this was a good idea.
Dolly Parton is personally trying to cure COVID-19. The woman is a godsend.
She and Kesha did do a duet on Kesha's last album, Rainbow.
I didn't set the timer. Was that the fastest Kesha reference we've ever had?
You gotta take your chances when you can.
That's really good. So today's topic, if people can't figure this out from this nonsense, we're going to talk about musicals. Wayne, this was your idea.
Yeah, we've talked about, I guess this falls roughly under the category of a genre, although there are multiple genres under the subheading of musicals. So I don't know if musical is a genre per se. But we've talked about horror and you wanted to do different things. And just, over the last few years, I've become more enamored of musicals than I ever had been before. I mentioned this in the blog post. Mm-hmm. I don't think I ever disliked musicals. I just never sought them out or gave them much thought. And in my exposure to them, like most people who grew up somewhere other than New York City or a major metropolitan area, was through television. I saw Sound of Music as a kid on TV, and Mary Poppins, and as some commenter pointed out, pretty much every Disney movie.
Although Disney movies are weird, because at the last fourth, roughly, there are no more songs in most Disney films.
Yeah. I'm going to give a quick plug before we need to get to the guest soon. But before we get to the guest, I'll give a quick plug to friends of the show, Kester and Andrew Dorowski. They host a podcast called Disney Animation Minute Essentials, where they which I've been on in my past, will be on in your future. But they basically analyze Disney movies, and they have like a whole big thing where they will explain to you the phases of Disney feature production and when like the musicals sort of fell out of favor and why. I mean, like I guess if you count Frozen, like that is a musical, I guess. And
Yeah, no, it is a musical. Tangled's a musical. The Princess and the Frog is a musical.
But not in the same way as like, well, I don't know. It's their show. This is not today's topic. We're not talking about Disney. But anyway, Wayne, because it's relevant to the way that you got into musicals, we'll have to talk about the idea of musicals being popular and what I meant by popular when I titled that blog. But you should introduce the guest.
Yeah, I invited my friend Dan Franklin on, and Dan can tell you more about himself. But Dan kind of changed my opinion toward musicals in general. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on. Very much.
Hey, Dan. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys. Hi, Mav, Hannah.
Thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely.
So you've heard a musical before?
I might have heard of a couple. Yeah, I'm an art and theater teacher at a public school here in the Pittsburgh area. Been doing it for about 2.5 decades, and the whole time I've been there, I've always been involved in the theater program there in some capacity. And over the last 15 or so years, I've been their director. And so I have had my fair shake. My interest in musical theater goes back before that, all the way back to when I was in high school, and that's when I got involved. Yeah,
I was also in high school. I was not what's the word I'm looking for? Singer. So my involvement in musicals, I one of my high school jobs was one of my many high school jobs was I worked at the local public access television station. So I recorded all of our high school musicals and directed the recordings for TV. And I also did makeup. That's where I learned to do theater makeup. So, I am a big fan and have been since I was very young.
Yeah, my high school, incredibly rural, not a big budget kind of thing. We didn't do a production every year. They were occasional. They weren't all musicals. Being the art guy, I was the guy building props and painting backdrops and that kind of thing more than anything else.
What kind of musical do you do that stars tumbleweed in? That
would be Oklahoma.
Yes, exactly.
That's true.
Exactly.
Which my high school did. Big production. And I'm pretty sure maybe I didn't. I at least paid to go because all my friends were in it, but I can't sing and I can't dance and I can't act. So I'm pretty sure I wrote an article about Oklahoma for the high school newspaper. So that was my contribution to musicals is occasionally writing and talking about them and saving up my pocket money to go see them. And yes, I'm going to call it pocket money this entire show.
See, I'd certainly seen musicals mainly through movies. Let's say not a big theater area where I grew up. My high school, I remember they did a production of Bye Bye Birdie a couple years after I graduated that I went to see.
Starring tumbleweed. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. my college, I only remember 2 productions there. It was Pippin and Little Mary Sunshine, I think was the name of it.
Okay.
And then there was this local theater production did Godspell at the now abandoned movie theater in Waynesburg.
Yeah, this hasn't come up in a while. So for listeners who just don't understand my shock, Wayne grew up in a ghost town. There's nothing there.
It's phenomenally rural. Godspell. I have no idea how that got approved or produced.
That's kind of what I'm wondering. Yeah,
but there it is.
Well, you said it was in an abandoned haunted theater or warehouse?
That was actually, it's now abandoned. It's the Opera House. It was the movie theater in downtown Waynesburg. That is old school classic Art Deco theater built in the 1920s or 30s that over time became a dilapidated hellhole, where I saw most of the movies growing up. But and they produced Godspell there. Now and in college, the productions of Pippin, there was a nearly abandoned, haunted, ancient theater building there that was they were going to close down the theater department my senior year. And this is actually a story I will be telling in far more detail on our upcoming episode on A Christmas Carol. Stay tuned. And they had closed it down. It was falling apart, and they've since rebuilt a new theater and everything. But anyway, my point being, my exposure to this stuff was really fairly limited, not having access to Broadway or a whole lot of pocket money. And I certainly saw plays over the years. My college did plays other than musicals, and when I was in grad school, I saw a couple of really great productions. And I moved to Pittsburgh and met a lot of people involved with the Pitt theater department, and I saw a ton of shows through them, but very few musicals. And it's like I say, I never disliked them. I just never really thought of it as, here's this thing I'm into. And I don't know, a number of years ago, just Dan and I met through mutual friends. We probably met at a bar, Dan. I'm just going to make the assumption we met at a bar.
I'm going to guess we were there to see a band, yeah.
Yeah, to see a band. And because they were mutual friends, the one band in particular, Dan and I ended up going to a lot of house parties together. And he and his wife Jess just became friends over the years, and I like to think very good friends. And there was several years back that Dan invited me up to see musical production of Young Frankenstein that he was directing for his high school. And I've said this before. I've said this to Dan. When I went, I want to be supportive of Dan. This should be fun. But I fully admit my expectations for a high school musical were not very high.
You were going to go see your friend's crappy musicals, what you're saying.
Yeah. Quite honestly, that's the truth of it. And
it's the equivalent of when your friend's playing at open mic night.
Yeah, well, and I mean, quite honestly, Dan, it was our friends inviting us to go see their band, which we, although they were very good and we had a lot of fun. But I said this to Dan that night. I was completely blown away. The level of production, the level of talent, of what these kids were able to do, what Dan was able to pull out of them, just completely, really kind of blew me away. Mm-hmm. And I've only missed one since, just because there was a conflict of schedule. And last year because
there was a pandemic. Yeah, this time. Yeah.
It's something that I look forward to every year, and quite honestly, has opened my mind toward musicals in a bigger context. And I'm happy to say, very briefly, during Dan's production of Spam-A-Lot, I got to be in that production.
Oh, you were? Yes.
I was a 55-year-old high school student in Spam-A-Lot.
And that was not planned at all. I didn't even know you were sitting there.
Yeah, well, and just to back that up, this is an anecdote, and then we'll actually get into the topic. But part of that is, they're looking for the Holy Grail, and Dan and the production it was hidden under a seat in the audience, a random seat. I went online, bought tickets, chose a seat purely at random in the front row. My roommate Marcel and I went. We had 2 tickets sitting side by side. He's like, "Where do you want to sit?" And I said, "Oh, that one." It happened to be the seat with the Holy Grail, because of course it was, given my Arthurian background. And at the end of the production, the student playing Patsy, who has also had the lead in a couple of other productions, and he was flat out amazing. I couldn't take my eyes off him during that production. Came down, pulled the Grail out from under my seat, took me by the hand, and led me up on stage. And I have a picture of that someplace, which we can put in the show notes. So.
Awesome. Well, I mean, that's a good introduction, because, for people who listen to the show, you should always read ahead on our blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where we post ideas for upcoming shows. And we have a call for comments where we talk about our thoughts and what the show is going to be about. And we ask for you to give your feedback before we record. And probably between the post on the blog and I always repost them on my own Facebook, the comment that we got the most from the post was, "What do you mean suddenly popular? I've always loved musicals." And there's okay, so first of all, people have to understand something. There's 2 things. First off, SEO, search engine optimization. In order to get people to read our post, I have to pick provocative titles for our blog. I want to understand.
No, I think you should own the title.
I do.
I think you should own that title.
That's part 2. When I say suddenly popular, I think it's very obvious. I mean, one of the jokes on the show for the last year has been, I was looking forward to the movie Cats, knowing full well it was going to be horrible, because I've been a massive fan of Cats since I was 7. I love that story. I love musicals. We talked about I was involved as much so as I could be as a non-singer when I was a kid in high school. I actually really do like them. A lot of people like musicals. Musicals, operas go back hundreds of years. But I don't know how you can make the argument that musicals are not more popular in, I'm going to say 2015 through 2020 than they have been for 40 years prior to that. The form was dying out, not dying out like it was going to go away.
Oh.
It certainly wasn't. I mean, it wasn't going to go away. Cats was huge when in a very small limited, but the popularity of something like, say, Hamilton is a phenomenon that I think it's helped the art form of musicals in general that goes beyond where musicals were in 2010. Hamilton, Wicked.
The musical. Yeah. I think it's fair to say that the musical has reinvented itself from the 19th century forward, because if I'm like, oh guys, we're going to talk today about the HMS Pinafore, all of you would be like, bye, I'm checking out this episode.
You mean the listeners, not me, because I'm for it.
Actually, I honestly don't know. But I mean, like, really, like musicals, like we know like some big titles, like, right, everybody knows like Rodgers and Hammerstein to some degree, The Sound of Music. Also, what's up with The Sound of Music being a Christmas movie? That's another topic. We don't have to do that today. Like Andrew Lloyd Webber. I hate Andrew Lloyd Webber.
I'm not a fan either. Not.
Yes, let's talk about this. Wicked. I mean, like, remember when stupid Book of Mormon was super popular and it was the hot like ticket no one could buy, and then like Hamilton eclipsed everything. And like this is a comment that we a comment we got on the blog where someone said I wasn't super into musicals because I was just like, oh, a musical. And then I realized there were a lot of different types of musicals and they were about very different things, and there's a very different style of music. And I've always been a fan of musicals. In high school, because I didn't have the money to go see Wicked on Broadway. Mm-hmm. Although actually I did go to New York my senior year of high school for a journalism conference. And I got to sit in the middle seat in like the front, like middle row as Elphaba sang Defying Gravity. And it was like a super special moment because it was like the first, big like Broadway musical I saw like on Broadway. It was amazing. Nice. Actually the only musical I've seen on Broadway, though I've seen, shows in other places. Mm-hmm. But that we can get to that later. But like, that was just so cool and amazing. And I basically broke my CD listening to Wicked over and over again because, high school girl. But one of my friends, who's a dude who like likes musicals well enough, but it was like, like Eponine's On My Own. It's just like the anthem of high school girls who like are sad and like, these are kind of girly things. And I was like, okay, well, there's like, Hamilton. You really like history. I bet you'd enjoy Hamilton. And he was like, nah. And then like 3 years later, after Hamilton got big, he was like, oh yeah, actually, this is really good. I was like, you gotta give things a shot, my friend.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is,
I think Wicked was one of those last really box office smashing musicals that was so traditional, just pulling out all the stops, all the effects, and the music is beautifully sung. And before that, you had Lion King, which was another huge Broadway success. And it had such a very different style to it. And then years later, you had Hamilton, which is, again, huge. But
just going to skip right over Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, aren't you?
I'm going to mention that when we talk about Starlight Express.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh man, Spider-Man.
But yeah, yes, no, I get where you're going. It different in form. What do you mean by that? When you say taking, for instance, a Wicked, and you're putting Wicked in the old world of a Cats, a Phantom, these prior musicals and then you're saying Hamilton's a different beast.
Hamilton's very different, yes, because it reshaped the way we see musical theater. Just bringing in the hip hop and everything with it, and the way the songs are written. I don't want to say definitively that was the first time that was done, but I mean it certainly opened doors. Mm-hmm. Whereas Wicked, the songs were, and I hate to say it's very like traditionally done as far as musical theater goes.
Yeah, actually, there's this book, one of my favorite books of criticism ever, which has nothing to do with my actual field of study, but it's called Change for Good: A Feminist History of the Broadway Musical by Stacey Wolf. Mm-hmm. And it begins and ends with Wicked. And basically, like, what she does is, like, she goes through, like, Rodgers and Hammerstein and then, like, moves through the decades of U.S. American history and musicals, all the way up to Wicked, and shows how Wicked, to some degree, plays with the conventions of the traditional musical in terms of gender, like, taking the type of song, like a duet, like, between someone like Curly and Laurie in Oklahoma, and repurposing that for, like, Elphaba and Glinda in What Is This Feeling, where they're, like, I hate you, but it's like, I love you. And then, the end song where they, talk about for good, and, the energy in that musical, because of how it's written, displaces the heterosexual relationship, which is, she calls it like a convention of the genre, basically, because it's just so prominent in many of these musicals, onto Elphaba and Glinda. But simultaneously, like, it's constantly like using these tropes, and that's what makes it so easy to recognize, like, the work that Wicked is doing.
Yeah.
So that was a long-winded way of saying yes.
Oh, that's great.
I don't want to call out anybody's age, but I want to go back to something Wayne said earlier about the types of shows that his area was doing when he was growing up.
Yeah, go ahead and call out my age, Dan. That's okay.
Yeah, Wayne is 95, Hannah is 12, so we've established that on the show before. Go ahead.
I am 29.
Sure.
Oh dear Lord, I'm 29.
I'm 95.
Well, I went to high school in the 80s and in the mid to late 80s. And, the fare that we knew as musical theater was very similar to what Wayne had, where it was mostly shows from what you would consider that golden age of American theater. It was all Rodgers and Hammerstein, Porter, shows that were written decades and decades ago, because there didn't really seem to be a whole lot coming out that was either appropriate or available for amateur theaters like high schools to do.
And Dan, you and I have talked. You will probably never get the opportunity to do cabaret.
I was flat out told by my administration that I would not be allowed. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you bring it up?
I did. I did, because I really wanted to do it. And there's 3 versions out there.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just because you're talking about the high school versions, one of the things that I think is interesting is, and this is not where I thought this conversation would go today, but there are, when we talk about, I said the sudden popularity of the musical, and what I meant I meant Hamilton came out is what I meant, right? And I think I tried to explain that in the blog, but musicals have been a staple of high school theater production companies just forever, right? Like everybody, like it's common that, like, even on Riverdale, the greatest show in the history of television, they do every season, they do here's the musical the school's doing, because it's high school, and of course it is, right?
And they did Hedwig last year, which I'm thinking Dan will also never get to produce.
Well, see, that's what I think is interesting, though, because probably for most people, for people who do not live in New York City and have Broadway money, right? And yes, I realize that there are theater production companies in other places, but like the musical is really sort of a staple of Broadway, right? Or London, or there are a few places where it's massive and then still expensive. Go ahead.
But like, the musicals we know because they're on Broadway and they're commercialized and they
won Tonys and stuff.
Yeah. And like,
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge process. Like, there's a reason why I know, because I'm a nerd. There's a reason why we know The Lion King as like the big Disney musical, because it was so successful on Broadway. And some of you might be like, what do you mean there's a Hunchback of Notre Dame musical based on half Disney, half the actual novel, which also part of the reason why I suspect it is not super popular is because it's really dark and actually does the end of the book-ish.
And the shame of that, real quick, by the way, is the music in that is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah, it's super good. I mean, like the original songs from the Hunchback of Notre Dame movie. Like, I don't think a high school would let them do, some high schools would let them do things like Hellfire, because it's like about a dude wanting to rape a woman.
Well, yeah, and see, that's what I'm wondering. So we have these musicals that are inaccessible because they're expensive and they're location based. You can't just go and see Hamilton whenever you want, the way you can in non-pandemic times go see Star Wars or whatever is playing in the theater. You have to wait for Hamilton to come to your town. You have to save up money and you have to win a fucking lottery. Yeah. Like literally,
and it's not going to play at the dilapidated Opera House in Waynesburg.
Right.
Yeah, have you guys seen Hamilton like in live?
I've never seen it live. I've only seen the
I've not had
I saved up my pocket money. I mean, like literally, like
I sold bottle caps.
I was thinking like she had a paper route, you know.
I mean, like
my grandmother would say, "Save your pocket money."
I mean, when you're in grad school, you're on a budget.
Sure.
And so, like Durham, North Carolina, like a few years, I think, before I moved here, opened up DPAC, which is like the Durham Performing Arts Center, and it's really beautiful. There's really not a bad seat in the house, and I know because I have been bought back row tickets to see a show, and it was still great. And they now have like a touring Broadway season that comes through every year, and we got Hamilton. And let me tell you, Josh and a friend and I saved up our money, and we were ready to go. And Ticketmaster, like we had to like register for the opportunity to get tickets, and then like Ticketmaster assigned us a random time slot, and I got the early time slot. And there's also some confusion about whether or not it would be better to be on Ticketmaster or like wait in line in person for stuff. And then we had to like pick out days and alternative times about how we would figure it out. So I like ended up buying my friend's ticket because like she was in a different time, and like there's a limited amount of tickets, and it was like this whole thing that we were like planning in advance. And like people online were like just posting like stuff on Twitter. Like I've never seen more people tweet at Ticketmaster or the Durham Performing Arts Center, like wondering what was going on and being upset that they like lost their slot. It was a
full-time job to even get the opportunity to see it.
Yeah. Which is like it's more than you need to know. But like that was like the kind of like excitement that's like it felt like waiting outside the bookstore for like the 7th Harry Potter novel, where like except most everyone I think got their copy of The Deathly Hallows. Not everyone got a copy, like a ticket to go see Hamilton.
Right. I didn't get to go. I mean, I've watched it like I've literally watched it, I think 6 or 7 times on Disney Plus. But I've listened to the album a bajillion times, right? But but I didn't get to go. There's an accessibility problem, and what I was getting at was I think that for most people, for people who don't have the money and the proximity to have easy access to musicals, probably I think most people's experience with the idea of musical theater probably is high school. Like that's probably where most people get it. So like, seeing productions like Dan's, I think is something that happens. And I think it's interesting because, just in doing research for the show, I rewatched one of my favorites, this week as well. I watched a lot of musicals this week because I'm, like Hannah, I'm a nerd. So I rewatched Rent. Right. And I was just thinking, they perform Rent in high school. How do they perform Rent in high school? For exactly the reason Wayne was talking about. And there's a high school book. There's a cut of Rent available for you to perform on a high school stage. And I'm really curious, because they try to tone it down and remove some of the more questionable elements. But Rent is only questionable elements, so I don't know exactly what they take out.
Well, Dan, you and I had a conversation about that. I think the first I heard about the high school versions of these things was through you. You did Chicago a couple years ago, and you were talking about exactly that, the changes and quite honestly, I've been surprised at some of the stuff that you and your students have gotten away with on stage that my high school would never have allowed. Some of that is because I was in high school 95 years ago. But
I'm fortunate that I can kind of push the envelope, and the audience usually seems to enjoy it.
Like the biggest number in Chicago is like people in their underwear, so what do you do?
I'll have to find some visuals. We of course, we had to really front end this with the parents. We had to tell them, we said, look, we understand most of your reference to Chicago is probably the film that came out way back in 2002.
Sure.
And, we said at the very first parent meeting, we're like, we're not going to put your children up there in lingerie and fishnet. Okay. And just so you understand that, we're going to go with this a different style artistically. Wayne, I don't know if you saw that one.
I did. Yeah.
but we had them in various 20s style, not flapper dresses, because each outfit was different. But they were all in like silver.
Okay.
And, with that juxtaposed against the steel set and the black sweetheart chairs and everything, it kind of popped really nicely. And we had some pretty good lighting for it. But yeah, the prominent rise of high school versions of shows, I think is interesting because licensing houses make their money mostly off of high school theaters. Mm-hmm. And if there's a really popular title out there, like Rent, you're not going to sell the rights to that to perform a production if schools can't do it.
Right. Exactly. So that's exactly my thought.
You got to make these high school versions of it. And I think that's what, what the licensing house for Chicago realized is that we need to make a high school version of this so that it can be available. And I think that's also why you're starting to see a lot more recent titles, I think, showing up in high schools. Something else I wanted to bring up is the transition from so many films into staged musical adaptations. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember the first film I saw that was a musical was Grease. I mean, we saw it at the drive-in, when I was, oh God.
Because you're also 95, yes. Yeah. What's a drive? Actually, no, drive-ins are back because it's the only kind of movie people can go to. I forgot about that.
So are you talking about musicals like Chicago actually being translated into film, which actually is an interesting title because it was one of those that won a Best Picture award and made musicals come back, because I remember watching Wizard of Oz and The King and I as a kid, and then there was a while when musicals like new ones weren't coming out. So and now there's Grease and stuff. Are you talking about Singing in the Rain? Okay.
Lion King.
Oh, so Singing in the Rain or Frozen.
Young Frankenstein, which was not a musical, and well, this isn't a movie that got adapted, but the graphic novel Fun Home, Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, got made into a musical. Yeah, and there's, while she references music and show tunes, her father being a fan of show tunes in the graphic novel, it's a graphic novel. There's not actually songs in it. And I find those adaptations kind of fascinating of how that takes place.
It's where do they decide to put songs? Where in this is going to make a great musical impact moment?
To me, the prime example of that with that particular production is the song "Ring of Keys," which became the central, most popular song in that musical. That's based on a single drawing and a single panel in that graphic novel, and it's not even referenced. She and her father are sitting in a diner, and there's a woman truck driver who looks cliche lesbian, and she has a ring of keys just drawn hanging from her belt. She doesn't even mention that in the narrative of the graphic novel, but whoever wrote that musical, and it's a significant scene in the book. I mean, the scene and what it means is important, but that ring of keys was just drawn in. It was just
that was the thing. That was the one thing from that art, from that piece of art, that just spoke to the person who wrote the book.
Yeah, and I find that kind of amazing how this little tiny configuration of drawn lines becomes a hit Broadway song.
So it kind of leads you to wonder. It's why the decisions to make Fun Home or to make Beetlejuice or Legally Blonde, of all films? Who makes that decision to make that into a live musical production?
Yeah, because that seems Fun Home seems an unlikely choice to me.
Yeah, I guess things like Singing in the Rain and The Lion King are pretty obviously already mostly musicals in the film sense. Well,
yeah, but I mean, is it any different than Broadway is essentially trying to do the same thing that Hollywood does, right? Where who decides that you're going to make a movie out of Legos, right? It's I've got access to this IP, so I'd like to try something. And we named Lion King, Singing in the Rain, Legally Blonde. These are things that worked out. But I made the joke earlier. Obviously, Spider-Man, that should be a slam dunk, right? Because everybody loves Spider-Man. And it really is. Someone was like, I can, let's talk to Marvel, let's talk to Disney, let's get the rights to this, and we're gonna make a shit ton of money. We're gonna make a Spider-Man musical, and then it was
And put Julie Taymor in charge.
Yeah. And then, what could possibly go wrong? Everything, people could die, like literally everything went wrong with Spider-Man. But I mean, I imagined that was the line of thinking, was just, we don't know what this is going to be, but we just clearly we're going to make a bunch of money. We've got Bono. That's got to be something, right? I guess.
I think when they start off thinking we're going to make this the biggest XXX whatever ever, you doom yourself.
Yeah,
you've lost all artistic integrity.
Yeah, because then it becomes all about the mighty dollar,
Mm-hmm. So that basically, I mean, is it just that like someone really has a vision, or that Ring of Keys? I think there's something there. Or Mean Girls. I love this. I need to express this in song, right? Like, is that what happens?
I have no clue.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like asking, like, how do novelists get their inspiration? And like,
yeah.
I mean, like,
where do you get your ideas?
Who can say?
Yeah.
Or is there a producer somewhere that says, hey, my 17-year-old girl really likes this film, make it into a musical?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, to look at, I've heard Lin-Manuel Miranda talk about just, how Hamilton came to be, right? I've heard Barack Obama tell the story of meeting Lin-Manuel Miranda for the first time, where Miranda was explaining to Obama, how he was going to do this. He was going to change the industry of musicals because he's got like an idea for a political thriller starring the greatest hip hop artist of all time, Alexander Hamilton. And Obama, who, by the way, is a big hip hop fan, just kind of humoring this crazy dude who, is in the White House for some reason. I mean, he was there because In the Heights had done well. And, so Obama just tells the story where he's like, all right, okay, that's really good. I'm going to go shake some other people's hands now. And then like fast forward like 4 years, Obama gets to see Hamilton and he's just like, dude, what the fuck? How?
Well.
He'll talk about how he loves it now, but he met him like 3 or 4 years earlier. Just like, they just brought him to the White House, and he's just like, wow, who let this crazy man in? I'm the president of the United States. Why is this person near me? But I mean, like, but that's the thing, right? Like, I'm sure, like, clearly, and Miranda has said this, basically he was reading a bunch of history books and he just saw something that to him was this inspirational, he's like, this is the immigrant story and how we fit into the American dream. And I need to express this in song because I'm me, and worked his ass off to create the greatest, the most successful musical of all time. Cool. I don't know. I mean, like,
I guess no, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to make a short comment, is that what I love about that whole creative process that he went through is that it's so organic.
Right.
Like he wasn't paid to do it or told to do it or inspired by it. He wasted
his own money. I mean, it worked out.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Wayne?
No, I guess maybe changing topics, but just to dig a little deeper, there's that part of me, like, just in general, as a thing, why musicals? Like, what about that speaks to us as a narrative form? Because I mean, it's not something that happens in real life. I mean, rarely are Marcel and I here in the house and one of us breaks out into song. He sings to himself a lot, but that's something else entirely. But not full song choreography kind of thing.
Well,
it's people sing around the house. I get that, but I'm just curious why that form is a thing.
Well, Scott McMillan, who is an academic who wrote the book The Musical as Drama, would say that what is unique about the musical is that there are kind of two conflicting things going on. There's the progressive narrative of the plot that's being written in the book, like, Wicked tells the story of Elphaba and her tragic rise or fall, depending on how you want to read that. And I guess Cats progresses.
No.
There's no. I disparage Cats, but partially because I hate non-narratives. So
we'll have to talk about that in a bit.
But anyway, but there's also like the repetitiveness of the music. I mean, what I love so much about musicals is that there are these, little moments that repeat over time, and then they, change, and it's just so interesting to watch the music transform and take a life of its own. So, the musical, he argues, is its own dramatic genre.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very special there that you don't see in the opera, which I do you? See, that's what he would say. I think that the basic there's a lot of overlap between opera and something like ballet and musicals, especially if you have someone dance a big ballet number in your musical, but it's not the same.
See, I'm actually curious about Dan, since you've literally produced music several, right? And I'm curious where you fall on this, because I understand his argument there to say that, opera and ballet and musical are different, but I
brought up ballet. I don't know if he talks about the ballet.
Honestly, to distinguish between musical and opera, I think is academic wankery at its at its highest, right? Because so here's the thing: I enjoy both, right? I enjoy the opera Carmen as classically performed, right?
Oh, that's the last opera I saw. And now the North Carolina Opera will not stop sending me emails.
Okay. So, but Carmen, certainly an opera. You'd agree, Hannah?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Carmen, a hip opera starring, I want to say Beyonce and Mekhi Phifer, if I remember correctly. I'm doing this from memory. It's been a while since I watched it. I didn't rewatch it for the show. I would argue that if you watched it's a film, but if you watched the film Carmen, a hip opera, you'd look at that and you'd say, this is a musical, because it is. It's a musical. And if you didn't know what opera was, you'd call it a musical. It only is an opera in as much as that it is exactly Carmen. It's the same story. It's the same songs. It's performed in. I only think it's different in that, I agree that bluegrass music and country western music are different. I agree that hard rock and soft rock are different. They're different genres, but I don't think you can make a hard distinction. I think the distinguishing for me, what distinguishes an opera from a musical is tropes and styles of the people involved in creating it.
Well, also, there's a lot more singing in an opera. Usually,
it depends on the opera, right?
Hamilton. Usually,
words in Hamilton at all.
Or Les Mis.
Yeah, or Les Mis. Sure, yeah. I hate Les Mis. The way you feel about I know the way you feel. And I rewatched it this week too, and I just think it's so.
In the musical world, like Hamilton and Les Mis, those are called sing-throughs.
Yeah.
Like Tommy as well. There's no dialogue.
There's no dialogue in Tommy.
It's just singing all the way through.
And the Who wrote Tommy would call Tommy an opera, not a musical. They call it a rock opera.
Well, because it was that before it became a musical, and then the movie version of it as well is just there's no. I don't believe there's any dialogue in the movie.
Negligible. There's some. Yeah, it's negligible.
It's been a while since I've seen
more than there is in the play.
Yeah. Okay.
I see a distinct difference between operas and musicals, and I can't really explain why, but I can tell you I would feel 100% comfortable directing or producing a musical. I would nowhere feel comfortable directing an opera.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells me, at least for my mindset, I feel that they're different things.
So would you feel comfortable producing Tommy? See, that's where I think it's weird, right? Is it just a musical because Dan produces it? Does that just turn it? If you suddenly produce Carmen, does it become a musical instead of an opera because you use your directorial sensibilities in making it? See what I'm asking? It's a weird.
You mean like if I take an orange and say this is a lemon, you have a lemon?
No, because I didn't know. I don't think that's the same because I'm not because I think it's. I think that there is a style in which I think there's a difference between drawing something in pencil and drawing something with paint, right? But I think that at the end you've produced a comic book either way. Wayne, you'd agree, right? Like you can't say because he's a painter, he's not a real comic book artist. Real comic book artists use pencils.
Yeah,
shit. I think that there's a different intent in the creation where yes, I see a difference between how Carmen was produced, how Figaro was produced. I see a difference in these things, but I think that the end product that you see on stage or on screen, if you're talking about a film, I think that has much more to do with the choices made in the production than the nebulous argument of whether this was an opera or a musical to start. At least that's my feeling.
I think operas and musicals, they emphasize different things.
Okay.
Like operas, for example, clearly it's about the singing. It's about the vocals and
sure.
And the delivery. Secondarily, it's about the scenic and the costumes. Mm-hmm. When my wife and I, when we go to operas, I never really listen because I'm just so blown away looking at everything. I'm like, oh my God, yeah. Where musicals, you have this sort of, it depends on the musical, depends on the style, right? But you sort of have this threefold effect of acting, vocals, and choreography all kind of melding together. While some musicals, yes, may put more emphasis on vocals, like Les Mis, and there's not much choreo in Les Mis, but there's still a visual spectacle, right?
Yes,
when they build the whole barricade and everything. But I think operas really have that sole focus on the singing, whereas musicals, they sort of fold many elements in together.
Okay.
So I feel the scope of musicals in the traditional sense is a little more broad, whereas operas focus more on the one thing.
Okay. So to go to the place that I know Hannah's going to hate because of where do you place Cats?
I place Cats as a musical.
Okay.
Simply because it's a Weber. And
well, yeah, that was my thing. It's like but now you're sort of cheating, right? Like you're looking at the person who produced it specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a good answer for that either. It is a weird trick, and we've made this comment many times on this show, right? That like genre's a myth, right? Like we've said that. So like to distinguish is useful only in as much as it helps the conversation that you're having at that moment, I guess.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But I really do think that like in making certain types of distinctions, like this idea of like the progressivism of the plot to most musicals versus, how the music works alongside it or against it is a helpful way to like look at the conversation. Even like, thinking about, since we talked a little bit about musicals on the screen, whether they originated there or were, later turned into movie musicals or like, musicals on the stage, your experience is totally different watching something live or even like seeing something film live. As opposed to, watching like one movie over and over again. Not a musical. And also hate to bring it up. But Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, apparently, one like cast had like the actors playing Scorpius Malfoy and Rose Weasley do different things every single night of the production. So depending on what performance you attended, you would read their relationship differently based on the choices of the actors.
Oh, sure. The stage has that advantage, right? Like each production is slightly different.
And like, even though to me, Elphaba will be Idina Menzel and Glinda will be Kristen Chenoweth, just because I listened to that CD over and over again. In fact, you might feel like you're hearing about Wicked over and over again, as much as I have talked about it. But, I've seen Wicked 3 different times, because actually I've only had to save up my pocket money one time to see it. The others have been treats. Spread out over the course of like a decade. But, I like each Glinda and each Elphaba were totally different. In fact, I saw Wicked the first 2 times in the US, and then I saw it on the West End. And it was actually a bit different, just even in the dialogue on the West End.
Yeah, and even seeing the same production for exactly the reason you said with Harry Potter, the same production on 2 different nights is subtly different. And that's whether you're at a high school musical level or you're at a, Broadway Tony Award winning level. Like just, there's going to be subtle differences that essentially what you change when you're doing a different take, when you're doing a film, every time you see a stage production, that's a new take, right?
Yep. And then I went and saw Phantom when it came to DPAC, and like the staging was different than the last time the person who accompanied me saw the staging, and that changed how they saw Phantom, although not enough to like. Okay, can we just talk about Phantom for a second? Because it's so popular still, but also like so rapey, and also like I feel in the original musical, like it's very clear that Christine is not into the Phantom. Mm-hmm, then Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote this sequel, like Love Never Dies, where she actually was into the Phantom, and it feels like some sort of like incel like
that was horrible. We watched that this spring. Like we watched Phantom this spring, and then we watched that the week after.
I've never seen the sequel.
Dude.
So just go read the Wikipedia page, and that's like I'll tell you all you need to know. Also, Andrew Lloyd Webber has like terrible politics. Also, we saw Evita, and Evita was just like, she's a devil woman. She like gets what she deserves. They like sing like really misogynistic songs. I'm like, is this like what I grew up with? Like, how long did it take me to notice this? You know, because Madonna. And then the Phantom of the Opera. After the Chicago revived Hollywood's interest in musicals, like the Phantom of the Opera came out with that man who can't sing super well. I would bother to remember the cast, but I think that's more amusing. So,
now we're starting to get into like talking about the narratives and stuff. I find one of the comments that I also saw just randomly online from our blog was somebody said that Cats does have a narrative, and maybe I just didn't understand it. I've seen Cats a dozen times in various versions. I adore Cats. I like study literature for a living. Cats famously has no narrative. That's part of it's not just me. Yes, a lot of what I say in the blog is me being a smartass because it's funny, particularly when there's two of us blogging, like going back and forth between me and Wayne. Like there's a lot of peek behind the curtains. There's a lot of us kind of talking to each other in it and making jokes and stuff, even on the show. But Cats does not have a narrative in the truest sense. Yes, there is a storyline. 30 seconds worth of plot. That's it.
Well, I think in general, and this comes in. This is comic stuff as well. Scott McCloud talks about this in Understanding Comics.
Yes.
The non sequitur panels, two things that don't follow each other, but our brain as humans looks for a way to connect them. We look for a narrative.
Yeah. I think there's more connective tissue than non sequitur. But it's not a story.
Like Cats, it has as much narrative as like the original Alice in Wonderland, which is that there is like a progression of moving forward. But it Lewis Carroll is famous for nonsense, and so are like the authors who followed, and like.
And like Cats is based on poems by T.S. Eliot, letters by T.S. Eliot, which again, not huge on what we actually call narrative and plot. So yes, Cats may mean something to you. There's a storyline that you are like sort of taking in as you view it. And there is a story. The story of Cats is once a year, the head cat gets to decide which of the other cats gets to be reincarnated. So tonight's that night. They all meet. They plead their case. The head cat picks the prostitute. The end. Famously, no narrative. That's the entire story of Cats is just, let's reincarnate. Let's have an orgy. We pick the hooker. That's it. And I enjoy it, but to me, it's more Cats is about the choices and the usage of the form of theater, particularly musical theater. It's about spectacle more than anything else.
It's about the language as well.
Yes.
You said it's performing poetry. It's a transposition of poetry.
It's literally performing poetry. It's T.S. Eliot's poetry, literally transposed onto a page. It's about ephemeral things. It's the difference between prose and poetry transposed into acting.
Spectacle.
Yes.
I don't really think Cats has a narrative either. I think it has more of what I would call a concept.
Yes.
Yeah.
And which again, I enjoy. Now again, part of it is nostalgic for me because the first time I watched it was when it came out. I was 7, right? And I'd never seen anything like this. And I watched it on, I saw a production on PBS, waited for it to come on again so I could VHS record it so that I could watch it again and again. to me, this was, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. And my mom would walk in the room and she'd be like, what is, no, and she'd leave. My mom still to this day never watched Cats. She's like, this is, and she'll tell you this is garbage. It's not, it's brilliant. But I was a weirdo even at 7, right? And I think that I think that part of I do think Cats is brilliant, and I understand why some people don't like it. I understand very much why people didn't like the film that came out last year.
It gave me nightmares, and
it's visually disturbing, but like ignoring the uncanny valleyness of it, right? Like, did you actually see it, Hannah? Did you watch the entire thing?
No, I only watched the trailer. It's on HBO Max, I think, right now.
Yes, yeah, I watched it. I've seen it twice. I watched it again this week, and it's, among other things, among other problems with it, so ignoring the uncanny valleyness of it, one of the problems with the film that nobody really talked about because they were too disturbed by the visuals is they tried to add story to it. Victoria in the original concept is she's the featured dancer. She's essentially a ballerina cat that doesn't have as much story as many of the others, but they try to make her your POV character, and they try to weave a narrative because they felt like if they gave you 2 hours of nonsense, a traditional film theater going audience wouldn't understand it. It would be very confused by the whole nothingness that's going on. So they added a plot, and that's weird. It hurt the film for me more than anything else, because I'm just like, what are you doing? And like, there's just they tried to make them intermix in a way that just let me invent the story of Cats for myself. But as you were saying, Wayne, like, let me do this myself. So
I'm going to tell my non-Cat story, because we're probably closing in on an hour's here. I haven't seen Cats on Broadway. I had sort of had an opportunity to. This is my one seeing a show on Broadway story in my life. I did a trip early 80s. I was in college, but I was working with a high school gifted program, and there was a student trip to New York, and I went as kind of chaperone, whatever. And that was my first time in New York City, and we went to see a couple of Broadway plays. We saw a production of Porgy and Bess at Radio City Music Hall with Larry Storch playing the white guy. and everybody listening is too young to know who Larry Storch is. Just Google F Group, because I'm 95. And the other, and I don't know who made this decision. Like we had, because the students didn't vote on this. We had opportunities for tickets to a couple different Broadway shows, and at the time, one of them was Cats, which was brand new at the time. And for some reason, that wasn't chosen. What we saw instead was the magician Doug Henning's Broadway disaster, Merlin.
I'm also a Doug Henning.
Oh wow.
Which I found a YouTube clip. We'll put it in the show notes. It's the performance from the Tony Awards in 1983. That was my Broadway experience. I got to see a musical production of Doug Henning doing magic tricks. I suppose I can say it fits into my Arthurian knowledge base.
I don't know whether you chose right or not. I don't.
Yeah, but
how old were you?
Go back to musicals again for like decades.
That might have something to do with it. Yeah.
I certainly think that Cats has more enduring relevance than Doug Henning.
My biggest memory of the show is flirting with the girl named Tiffany who was sitting next to me. So, there you go.
Tiffany, if you're listening today, you missed your opportunity.
Yeah.
If you guys could indulge me as your guest for just a moment.
Oh, absolutely.
I would like to go back to a question. We'll see if we can resolve it.
Okay.
Back to what Wayne asked earlier. It's like, why do they endure? Why do we still like them? I had an answer for it as both someone from my personal perspective and as a director. Mm-hmm. From my personal perspective, and my wife can attest to this, I'm an extremely dramatic person.
Mm-hmm. I can attest to this.
I overact everything. I mean, maybe that's why I teach acting. I don't know. But so, those dramatic moments with the songs where you're listening to it, you're like, yeah, I totally, like, that's what I listen to in the car. Mm-hmm. I don't listen to like feel good music. I love that drama. Mm-hmm. So that and just give them that bit of fantasy that, yeah, people do still break out in song and dance. And the other aspect of get them to feel, if I can get an audience crying, or at least if I can hear sniffles in the audience during a dramatic moment, I will, to me, that's like the gold medal. If I can get them to cry.
Your production of Big Fish killed me emotionally.
Dude, it was one of my favorites.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Just beautiful.
I also think they endured because they also speak to issues of our time as well, or even the old ones, or can be repurposed too. And that's, I think, a lovely thing about stage productions, and even readaptations of old musicals, like West Side Story. Like, there's an opportunity to reinvent it, to make it something different. I know I'm going to fulfill once again the high school stereotypical girl thing, but Wicked definitely is a musical that spoke to me as someone who felt alone in a conservative town, who felt very different, where saying things in certain settings could cost you social standing. It's not as dramatic as what happens in the musical, but a lot of people have specifically read in LGBTQ undertones into the musical, and have talked about the persecution of the animals and political context. And I think that we've talked about on this show before in a different context, Hamilton being a show about our time, not really being a show about the 18th century, although it is, and it's thinking about the 18th century. But how does the 18th century and its legacy fit in with our current moment, or rather the moment which it was written as well, which was, I think, it might have been a little different had Lin-Manuel Miranda written it now, as opposed to when Obama was president. So, I think that that's definitely part of it.
For me, one of the things that's interesting about musicals as a form, and this is a weird thing which I sort of hinted at in the blog, and we're not going to get too much into it because the show's running long. But one of the things that makes the musical work for me is, Wayne, you said, you don't go around just singing in real life, right? The trope of the musical genre is that certain things happen in your life, in your narrative, in the plot of what's going on around you, that are too emotional. And this varies by musical, because some of them aren't sung entirely, as Dan pointed out. But if you're watching, say, in Oklahoma, right? You're not supposed to think that they're diegetically singing. You're supposed to think that something has happened that is so emotional that I can only express it through song, right? And that's the West Side Story, same thing, right? They can talk, but then all of a sudden, when you're a jet. You have to this is a production, because more
is a heightened moment,
right? It's a moment of heightened reality for the characters on stage, which I think kind of sings to sort of the merger of what Hannah was just talking about and what Dan was talking about a moment ago, which is, I think, one of the things that makes a musical memorable and why it endures is, if I'm watching a straight narrative, be it a movie, be it Star Wars, be it a play, Romeo and Juliet, right? There are favorite parts of mine where I might remember a moment of dialogue or a scene, right? But for something like a Hamilton, something like a Cats, something Phantom of the Opera, anything in between, right? There are Wicked. There are the songs, the emotions attributed to that song, put you in a place to sort of bring you back to the moment of when you heard the song, the moment of when you saw the play, and what you were feeling and what was happening in the narrative at the same time, right? So if you're listening to Les Mis, which again, I don't love Les Mis. It's one of my least favorites, and I know, hot take, whatever. But I like Cats better than Les Mis. Kill me, right? But I'll use both of them, right? Les Mis, there's a whole story going on there. But when you're really thinking about it, you've got I Dreamed a Dream, right? I Dreamed a Dream puts you in the film. Anne Hathaway took that part just so she could sing that song, right? Jennifer Hudson took the part in the most recent Cats so she could sing Memories, right? Memories, I Dreamed a Dream. This is a moment of emotion that is the centerpiece And I think that's something we can associate for all the reasons on all our musical episodes we've talked about, Wayne, right?
Yeah.
Like music does something different.
No, I was just going to say, because, I don't burst out into songs when I'm having high moments of emotion, but I play a lot of music in my day-to-day life. I mean, it's there. And certainly over the course of my life, there are specific music tied into specific people and moments of my life that I hear a song, I am in that moment. And I think that's what you're saying. You know, like, as I was saying, Dan and I met at a bar seeing a band. There's a tremendous amount of my friendship with Dan that there's a very specific soundtrack to.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
And even to just take it a little further, it not is just about moments in your life, but there are specific ideas behind some songs. Like, to go back to Les Mis, do you hear the people sing? It's like, hello, you awful rich people. We're all starving here. And people have used that song at political protests before. For example, like, so it takes on a moment, like, Defying Gravity has taken on more meaning than like what's isolated in the show because it's been used to express like political ideas.
It brings to mind, there's a song, I don't know if you've seen the musical Something Rotten.
No.
But there's a song where the main character, his name is Nick Bottom. Obviously, Something Rotten takes place in Shakespearean time. And it's Nick Bottom's rivalry with William Shakespeare, which is funny because obviously Nick Bottom is from Midsummer, but he goes to see a seer who goes by the name Nostradamus, and the seer tells him if you want to outdo Shakespeare, you have to create the musical. And he's like, "What the hell are musicals?" But I don't know if you guys can put a note for the lyrics in there or anything. But, he says it appears to be a play where the dialogue stops and the plot is conveyed through song. And he's like, through song, but it talks about like how people will, just sit there and suddenly break into song, and the audience isn't going to think there's anything wrong with that. They're just like, it's a musical. We're along for the ride.
You guys have seen the play Rent or the film, either one.
Yeah.
Okay. That is a weird exception where I have this theory that because of who the characters in Rent are, because they're specifically, a bunch of, New York boho weirdos, it's the one thing where I believe they're really singing, like diegetically. I believe that the story of Rent is such that you've got all these down on their luck people dying of AIDS, trying to celebrate Christmas together, trying to get through the year. And like, yes, I get that there's, I get that there is a narrative going on, but I think that everyone else in Alphabet City in New York just has to deal with the fact that sometimes when you're talking to quirky artists, they just burst into song, and you have to just deal with it. And like I believe it's real.
So can we agree on anything about this genre?
No. Well, and just very, very quickly, because we keep, and this is the nature of the show, we keep jumping into more topics, but you use the diegetic term, and that idea of something that's taking place that the characters are hearing, and something that is that's part of their world as opposed to them breaking out into song that's part for the audience, and I'm not describing that well at all, but I think of Cabaret being a mix of those things. One of the productions I saw, Cabaret, was at CMU, and part of Cabaret takes place in the Kit Kat Club, and there are musical numbers in the Kit Kat Club, and I sat at a table on the stage with the people I went with. It just did set tables on the stage, so we were part of the play in that we were the audience of the Kit Kat Club. So those songs, everybody there hears. It's part of the production. But then, Sally starts singing at her apartment, and that's a completely different experience and use of music. And I find that mix kind of interesting and fascinating. And when it's done well, I can convey something really neat. So
my wife and I got to see Cabaret with Alan Cumming and Emma Stone on Broadway. And oh my God.
Yeah.
Get to see Alan Cumming in that MC role was amazing. And and we paid for the up close tables too. That was kind of like our Christmas / birthdays / anniversary gifts for like the next 2 years, to be able to sit there that one night.
You saved up your pocket change.
Pocket change, my goodness, I'll never live that down. I mean, like, this is like Pippin too, because it begins with like a troupe, and they break the fourth wall by singing Magic to Do. So I guess like this is a semi-common thing in some musicals. I mean, we've talked about some examples all throughout.
Yeah.
I think if it has an intended effect, it's fine. Just to have your ensemble out there dancing in the aisles for no reason other than to dance, to me is very irritating. It's like your job is to be up there. But
my Spamalot experience, like suddenly I was part of the production.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking of.
And you weren't expecting it. Yeah. Stupid pandemic, man. We were going to do the Mystery of Edwin Drood.
Oh,
and we were about a month.
So cool. Sorry, I'm a 19th centuryist.
So you're very well versed with it. Yeah. I mean, from the get-go, the moment the audience walks in, they are part of the show. You have the cast members all in character walking around, showing them their seats and having small talk with them and just riffing with the audience back and forth. Complete improv.
Yes.
Within that show, it never ends the same way twice. There are literally hundreds of different ways it can end because the audience votes during Act 2 on 3 different occasions as to what the next move in the plot is. So there's no way the show ever ends twice, and the audience gets that involvement. It's so when you're breaking the fourth wall intentionally, and it has an intended effect. I think it's very much okay.
And for an explanation, if you don't know The Mystery of Edwin Drood, it was a novel written by Charles Dickens, and he died in the middle of writing it serially. And because he wrote as he published, some of his novels took 2 years to complete. No one really knows the endings, though some people claim to. So the musical has done this cool thing that Dan just described.
That's really neat.
It's such an amazing moment. They're in the middle of a song. It's a big full company number, and suddenly it dies off. And you think, as the audience member, you're like, holy shit, what just happened? Did somebody miss something? Did somebody screw up with the audience or whatever? And then the MC type character says, and this is the point where Charles Dickens laid down his pen and died. In the middle of this musical number.
That's great.
I just want to know how it ends. I wish I could go back in time. I think this is actually a literal Doctor Who episode. I could go back in time, chat with Dickens for a minute. Hope he wasn't going to be a creep that day, just...
Oh, yeah, it's great because in the musical, the audience gets to vote who the killer is.
So we resolved nothing.
That's cool. It's better than all the other. We resolved that.
We resolved nothing.
We resolved that Edwin Drood is a great musical. Dickens should have finished it, and we're going to have to do another episode on this because we scratched the surface.
We didn't talk about West Side Story, not really.
Yep.
There's so many...
The Color Purple in the Heights is supposed to come out with its theater. Yeah, and it was supposed to be this summer, but COVID. Also, we haven't really talked about how COVID has impacted the theater community.
Or what people probably expected we talk about today is we focused very much on actual musicals, that is musicals on stage, but there's a whole history. We talked about how people don't really necessarily have the access. Musical theater has so informed cinema, and I think more so recently, but everything from Disney films like Frozen or Lion King to, I've just started watching Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, or Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
There's Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Glee, which as much as I disliked Glee, it was big in that kind of thing. People on our blog mentioned that they were introduced to musicals through Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes. Yeah. And Cop Rock, the second greatest show on the history of television after Riverdale.
All right. So, thanks so much.
So we're going to come back, and Dan's going to join us again.
Yeah, we're going to have to do this another way in the new year sometime.
Let's see. I had the opportunity to direct West Side Story about a decade ago, and I'd love to tell the story as to why it was one of the favorite shows I've ever directed and why I would never direct it again.
So stay tuned for that.
Tune in next time to a totally different topic.
Yeah. Anything you want to plug?
Oh, yeah. It's funny. Hannah actually brought it up this April, in mid-April, and stay tuned. It's going to start April 15th. The next production that I'm directing for my high school is Pippin.
Yeah. Which also, how are you going to do that?
I'm just hoping you have April allows you to have a play. Would be great.
Yeah, that would be a great time to talk about all the ways theater is being managed in time of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's a whole nother.
Because last year the Edwin Drood thing. I mean, like the shutdown was like the week before you were scheduled to go on. You'd already put a shit ton of work into it.
It was like 3 weeks out. We were just about to go into Sitz Pro and to do our lighting cue to cue.
Wow.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And then like half the cast graduates, so they just miss out.
Yeah.
Because it's high school.
And then, I pick shows based on the talent that I see at auditions. So, that show will probably not happen again until whenever. Will I ever direct it again? Probably not.
Huh. That's a shame.
Yeah.
And on that downer, Palindrome Hannah, anything you want to plug?
You can follow me on Twitter at Hanley Rogers, but I'm going to just keep sticking with the theme and say donate to your local food bank, and the link will be in the show notes.
Absolutely. And Wayne.
I guess I'll my blog again. I mentioned earlier in the show I've written about dance productions twice. They'll be in the show notes. So, and while you're there, read the 200 things I've written for my blog.
And then come back next week because there'll be a quiz. No, there won't be a quiz next week. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all of the places, always at Chris Maverick. You can follow the show in all the same places: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Vox Popcast. We've got a YouTube channel, which you should absolutely subscribe to. The YouTube channel is fun. As you listen to the show, you can see images of everything that we talk about. There'll be little pop-ups, especially on a show like today where we talk about, the visuals of a lot of stuff. So, please subscribe to us on YouTube. And I don't know, Katya's not here, so I don't know, hit bells or something. I don't know. Subscribe, like, hit bells, all the YouTube things. I'm not as old as Wayne, but I'm old. I don't know how anything works. But you can follow our show on the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where you can find out about what we're talking about next week. You can leave us comments. We will try to incorporate them into the things that we research and that we talk about as we sort of move throughout the show. If you enjoy the show, and we certainly hope you do, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from. And do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review, especially on iTunes. If you leave a review, write a little something, not just give us a 5-star rating, but write something that helps us get more popular by tweaking the algorithm, and it'll be cool. And we'll sing, not on the air, but we'll sing about it because we'll be so overcome with emotion.
I won't sing, and I will spare the world.
Oh, I'll sing like in a shower or something, but I'm just not recording that. But anyway,
I'll sing in my car or very loudly in a crowd of people at a bar watching a band.
There's no bars. There's no bands. It's 2020.
It's all gone.
I miss culture, society, those things.
You have Christmas on the square.
We need we've been cooped up in our houses for 9 months, just like everybody else. This is our only outlet to the world. We need your love and support. So please leave us a 5-star review and leave us comments on what you think about this show or any others in the show notes on Facebook or the blog or on the YouTube feed. Let us know what you're thinking. I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. I'd like to thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.